is something I got for Christmas. You can't touch it. So I opened up a box. This is from the son who gets me crazy stuff. All right. So just let me preface it with the canopic jar, Egyptian stuff, sun, and statue of Venus. Okay. So I open up the box, and it's really weird because he usually has things sent to me, but he tells me not to open them. You know, boxes start coming in December. He's like, don't open them. Don't open them. But this year he said, you can open anything you want because none of them are for you. It's here with me in Chicago. I'm like, what is so small that he ordered it and it's there in Chicago and he's going to bring it home on the train? I don't know. So I open up a box. There's something wrapped in bubble wrap. And there's this piece of paper. And it says, Guillaume Pepin, Sermones de Imitazione Sanctorum Proelorum Diebus Festus, Imitation of the Saints on their feast days, 1587, Venice, ex Johannes Ottani Bertani, which is the printer's office, printed title page with woodcut, and then it tells me about Mr. Pepin. He's a Dominican professor of theology, and he has a bunch of his sermons from the 1500s. And so I'm reading this, and I'm like, because he gets me weird reproduction books. Like I have a book of Kells, and I have another Psalter, and I said, what is it, sweetie? Is it a reproduction of this book? And he just dancing around, he's pointing to the date 1587. 1587. Oh yeah. He got me a book that was printed in Venice in 1587. And I brought it just because it's cool. It was a lot. He said, do you want to know? And I said, yeah, tell me. But he's single and he's really nice. No, I will tell you later. So anyway, this book was printed. It says it's stamped on pigskin leather, which apparently was a normal thing in the 16th century. Okay, so it has these metal clasps, and I'm very, it does open, but one of them is a little stiff. Okay, so, and I don't want to, because I'm very afraid of it, And so you open it up, and it's, we don't want to open it up too much, and it's printed, see, in Venice, 1587, and it's all in Latin. Apparently, it has not been translated yet into English. So he said, maybe you would like to translate it, but it's in lovely shape, and the type, the font isn't bad. It's not hard to read. Sometimes old books have a really flowery, swirly font. But the fascinating thing to me is, it's got marks from, other owners, and apparently it was in a collection once upon a time, and it was number 3 in the collection. Anyway, and it's stamped. The cover is obviously a crucifix, angels, it's God the Father. I have not sat down and translated the cover yet because I had a massive headache and a fever and I didn't feel good. But I will do so. Anyway, yeah, so this actually came from Venice in 1587. What do you mean? Well, well, if you take good care of books, if they don't get wet, it's just, we have manuscript, which means written by hand. This is post-printing press, right? This was obviously printed on a printing press in Venice. Apparently there were 160 different printing presses operating, printing houses in Venice in the late 1500s. But if you keep them in good conditions and they don't catch on fire. Yes, what would you want to add? Yes. So he went to New Orleans with his roommate because why not? And it was over $1,000. This is why I'm very, very careful. I know. So he was walking. He was in New Orleans, and he went by an antiquarian bookseller. He was in the French Quarter, and they're just doing what you do in New Orleans, I guess. And he saw these books, these old books behind the glass, and he went in, and this one just really attracted his attention because he knows I know Latin, and it just because of the beauty of the cover and everything, and also some of them were just like tens of thousands of dollars. It's not an option. And so he started asking. He said he went back to the hotel. He thought about it. And he went back. He's like, I think, tell me more about this book. Tell me about it. And he's like, I think I'm going to get this for my mother. And apparently they said, that's a really nice gift for your mother. I'm like, yes, it is. Anyway, this is my lovely Christmas gift. And so I ordered a custom-made acrylic case to put it in. You're not supposed to keep it in the sunlight. And not get wet, but it should be able to last. And I don't want to be the person in whose hands this crumbles into dust, But he gave me the bookmark from the bookseller in New Orleans, and he said they're really nice. And if you call them and tell them what you got, they might be able to have some records, like where has this been? Where was it before it was in this bookshop in New Orleans? And how did it get there? And anyway, so thank you for humoring me. But yes, both sides are stamped. It's called a blind stamp, which apparently means just a block stamp into the wet leather. And it stamps the cover. And yeah, that was my Christmas gift. So, which has nothing to do with Rome whatsoever. Except he was a Roman Catholic priest. There you go. What did you say, Matthias?
I need to know how long of my life I need to save my money.
Ask me later. Ask me later. Okay. Go ahead and get your reading questions out. I don't know. Yes, that was cool. So if anybody wants to see the thing later that was on it, but. Oh, yeah, I don't know if we have any. I don't know how old. They're the oldest copies of the Bible. We don't have a whole copy of the Bible that's really old, but what, 200 or 300 AD? Do we have anything that goes past that? I don't know. Yes, are just slightly BC. Or just slightly BC. For some reason, my video is refusing to focus. And possibly I made it angry by walking around and walking close to it. There we go. So I also apologize again. Number one of my brain isn't working is I forgot to bring my little clips that I bring for my maps. So I'm going to just hold them up for you, and it is okay. And I'm not in focus again, but I'm just going to, oh, there it is. I'm going to believe, like Tinkerbell, if I believe that it will come into focus. I think you guys all know this, but it's good to look at where things are in relationship to other things. All right, so we have been visiting. Yeah, that'd be lovely. Thank you. I didn't realize till I got here. I have shelves for each day and my clips were all slid back in. Okay, thank you so much. So we've been in Greece, right? We've been visiting Greece. And Dorothy Mills said something at the beginning of your reading that is really much easier to see on a map. She said, Greece kind of faces to the east. That I realize there's part of Greece on the west side of Greece, but do you see how the whole peninsula sort of curves a bit that way? And then the islands trail over, and we have a lot of islands that aren't on this map. And so Greece tended to have a lot of dealings with the east, with Asia Minor, with Egypt, with Palestine, Syria, Parthia, with the Black Sea area. They did send colonies. We'll talk about this again in a minute. Over to Italy in that time period. We talked about this like last September, when the time period when Greece was sending out all sorts of colonies. But for the most part, they kind of deal with that end of the Mediterranean. But look at Italy as opposed to Greece. Look how we had this nice curve. It curves down into Sicily, kicks at Sicily, and we get these islands here. It's directed this way. Can you kind of see that? Do you see what I mean? Oh. And so the peoples of Italy had a lot more doings with, the people on the southern coast of Gaul. all the way to Spain, the people in North Africa, the people on the islands here. Does that make sense? That the Greek world tended to move that direction, and the Italian world tended early on to move this direction. And she said this in the book, but it didn't, if you're not looking at a map, it's like it was Eastern oriented or Western oriented. Like, what? Okay, thank you. I think I'm good with this one because I'm just going to hold it up. I can, because it's the other direction. Thank you so much. So what I would like you to do, in the back of your reading guide, you have some maps, and we've added a few things on, but you have an Italy map. And I would like to just start out, it's on page 77. I'd like us to put a few things on our Italy map. First of all, I think that we should label Sicily, the island that it is kicking. I guess we could label the other two islands if you want to, although I don't think we're going to talk much about them. But Sicily is the big important island, the island at the toe that it is kicking. And all of this end of the boot, Sicily and the heel and the toe, all of this area was mostly Greek after, say, 850, 800 BC. Because remember, like I said, we were going to talk about it in just a minute. Those Greeks, when they started sending out colonists everywhere, this is one of the places they sent them. That's awesome. Who doesn't want to live in Italy, right? It's gorgeous. And it was close. Did you notice how incredibly close Greece and Italy are? I tend to think of them in my head as farther apart than that. For whatever reason, because I think, oh, the world of Greece, the world of Rome, they are just really, really close to each other. So it's a quick sail if you're going to send out colonies, okay? So on the map, you don't have to add this on your map. Do you see this word Magna Graecia? Great Greece. They actually called southern Italy Great Greece because it was full of Greek people. So if you've ever wondered, what's up with the Romans and all their gods, and how come they have all the same gods as the Greek gods, they just give them different names? Because they met a bunch of Greek people, they knew them. But the Greeks weren't the only place they got religion and stories and ideas from, and we're going to talk about the other group of people in a minute. So here's what I'd like you to do. On your map of Italy, on the top, I want you to draw a bunch of mountains. My mountains are just like triangles without a base. that you don't have to have fancy mountains. Just the purple words. You know. And I want you to label these babies the Alps. The Alps are very big. You guys all know this. Bet you all know that the Alps are enormous mountains, and Italy is ringed in by them in the north. It just so happens that apparently they're easier to go this way than they are to come this way. Like it's steeper on the other side, which is a bummer when you get there and you're going and then you have to slide down, which Hannibal found out that we will talk about in a couple months. They're very steep on the other side. But so groups of people that were adventurous and were looking for somewhere awesome to live and heard that over those mountains it was lovely and they're growing grapes and you can make wine and it's awesome. They would trickle over the Alps and then just stay and settle there. And so we get all these various tribes of people very, very early on. Just little groups of people who have filtered across the Alps and stayed. But we don't get a lot of people leaving, maybe because A, the Alps are steep, B, who wants to leave Italy once you're there? Why go back to France if you're in Italy? I don't know. The other place I'd like you to draw mountains is down the middle of Italy, not all the way to the end, but I do it on my map. Do you see I just drew mountains? They're not fancy mountains. Italy has kind of a spine, and the spine is called the Apennines. You can label those mountains the Apennines. So when I am on this side of Italy, if I want to get to the other side, I have to climb mountain range. It's not like the Alps. It's not huge. But it's not a hop, skip, and a jump either. You know what I mean? And so you see the people who settle over here, how they're westward facing. So we're not going back and forth all the time. But it did tend to cut off one side from the other side a little bit, so that groups of people living on one side were sort of protected from the people living on the other side. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's also add Rome while we're here. If you notice, if you see you have two islands. One of my islands is obscured by the key. The northern island, Corsica. If you go halfway down Corsica and straight across, that's where Rome is. So go halfway down that island and draw your finger, and then don't put it on the coast. Put it just a little way in, and you have found where Rome is. So it's about halfway, isn't it? Rome is a great spot because it's about halfway, because it's not on the ocean, but it's close to the ocean. Now, let me ask you, what's good about living by the ocean? Why do so many cities end up by the ocean? Yes. Okay, you can drink, you can eat. What else can you get by ocean? Yeah. Trading, money. Exactly. You can send ships out and you can get ships in. And it's very convenient. What is bad maybe about living on the ocean? Oh, you know what? Yes, and I imagine, because they have volcanoes, you know what I mean, very famous one like Vesuvius. And so I'm assuming that anytime there's volcanic activity, there's seismic activity. I don't know this, I don't know a lot about geology, but yes, so potential danger, natural danger. Is there any other sort of danger you can think of? What do you think, Rhett? Yeah, pirates. Yeah, we will just call them pirates in general. What? Hurricanes? No, not really in the Mediterranean. It's more an ocean, like an Atlantic and a Pacific thing. Are there hurricanes in the Pacific? Do we ever hear about hurricanes? Isn't it always the Atlantic? What's up with that? It must be because of the way the winds blow and the temperature differential and the trade winds. I know nothing about meteorology either. But you can easily be attacked. So the earliest people who settled Rome decided we want to live near the water because we want to ship things in and out. We don't live right on the water because we don't want everybody, landing and pillaging us. And you know what? To make it handy, they have a river. They have a river called the Tiber River. And it is not, you can't bring a cruise ship up the Tiber River, but back in the ancient world, their ships were not very large. Even a ship for a pretty long trip. I think I've told you guys this, that they had the Mayflower. No, it wasn't the Mayflower. It was the Santa Maria or the Pinta. I don't remember. I don't think it was the Nina. Anyway, they had a reproduction that sails around one of Columbus's 3 ships, and it was in Davenport about 5 or 6 years ago. And my son and I went and got on it. I thought, shoot, I don't want to be on a ship like this in the middle of the Atlantic. This is not a very big ship. I do not feel safe. So the ships that they normally used, the bigger the ship you have, the lower it sinks in the water. Does that make sense? With ballast and everything. And so you can't, the lighter the ship, the shallower the river you can go up, right? Because you don't scrape bottom. And so most of their ships were navigable up a lot of rivers and they wouldn't scrape bottom. And so a lot of the ships that they used could sail right up the Tiber to Rome. But a lot of them couldn't. They brought in I'm scattering through like 1,000 years of history right now, okay? It's not all at the beginning. But they brought in a lot of food from Egypt. Romans shipped in food. And they did have a port, though. This town called Ostia is at a place where the Tiber runs into the Mediterranean. And it's like 8 or 10 miles from Rome. It's not very far. And they would go down to the harbor in Ostia and unload bigger ships that couldn't sail up and down the Tiber. Anyway, they picked a great place. They had some level of protection from mountains, but they tended to be involved with Sicily and Corsica, and Sardinia is that other island that is behind my key. I do not know. I feel like that is a possibility. It should. If it's not true, it should be true. And so the first question I asked you is, despite the fact that they were in this glorious country of Italy, and they weren't right on the coast, the early Romans did come to a place where there were already people living. And generally, when you go to a place where people are already living, they don't want you to stay. Do you know what I mean? Like, what? We live here. Go, move along. You know, they don't want you to stay. So there were a lot of dangers. And I asked you, what did Dorothy Mills say about how exposure to danger affected the character of the Roman people? What kind of people did it produce? Should anybody answer that? Mm-hmm. Say a little louder. Tough, resilient. Do anybody want to add to that? Yeah, Jesse.
The exposure of danger made the early Romans to be very experimented. They also had self-control and capability.
Okay. Capable, self-controlled, tough. This is how we think of the Romans. A little Spartan, okay? Because the rest of Greece, think Athens and Thebes and Corinth, they loved beautiful things and philosophy. And it was a long time before Rome produced anyone we would call a philosopher or really produced literature. They did produce amazing buildings, incredible roads, some of which they're still using today. And they work on the I-74, every other year, and these Roman roads are still, they have been worked on a little bit, and they're also not running semis on the Roman roads, so to be fair. They were a very capable, tough, practical people. Much more like the Spartans than any other group of the Greeks that we talked about. And they did what they did very, very well. I brought in this is for my high schoolers, but it is pertinent for you guys too.
I saw an elephant.
You saw an elephant?
Yeah.
Oh, no, it wasn't an elephant, but yeah, I'll show, that is for you, and I'll show it to you in a minute. What? Don't confuse me, Matthias. I'm gonna, every time anybody confuses me, I'm saying, I'm sick. Be nice to me, I'm sick. Even if I'm not super sick. Okay, this is an aqueduct. This is a Roman aqueduct. So when you have a large group of people living together, they need water because you die if you don't have water, right? And if you have a tendency to dump all your poo and your rotten food in the water, don't drink it. It's not good. So we need fresh water brought in from places. And eventually, Rome itself had 11 aqueduct systems coming from 40, 50, 60 miles away. And so just basically a channel, a stone channel with water running in it. And how do we make the water run? What is one way to make water run from one place to another place? Yes. Gravity. And that's what they did. Ever so slightly, they used gravity over dozens of miles to bring water. This particular one is in southern France. It did not feed Rome. It fed a Roman town in southern France. It's still there. It's called the Pont du Gard. I got to go there in 1984. And in 1984, they let you walk across it. You could just go up there and you could walk in the channel that the water, the rest of it is just a bridge. It's a bridge to cross this river. They want their water to cross this water. So they built a whole bridge. But the only important part is the top that's bringing water to this French town. And except it's not bringing water there anymore. And it was empty. But you could go, like you could just have a picnic down there and then they just let you climb on it. And so we went across and the water channel, it had a roof over a certain length and then it was open. And then you walk a little more, and there was a roof, and it was open. And each section where there was a roof had Latin inscriptions about the building of it, like dates and things. But apparently now, A, they charge you money. B, they only let you walk on a pedestrian walkway they built onto the side of it. So I got in before they booted us off the aqueduct. But this is what they put their energy into, okay? Instead of chiseling out or casting in bronze the most beautiful human being you can imagine, like the Greeks did, we want water. We need water. We need roads. We need buildings that are, I mean, they're not ugly buildings, but we need buildings that are useful, that are practical. But we are also willing to steal ideas from anybody else. When we meet those Greeks in southern Italy and we see their awesome Greek temples, oh, we love that. We will take that. We like your gods. We like your temples. We will take that. And they brought everything in and they used it, but they used it for what we would call practicality more than beauty. Does that make sense? So I asked you guys, what two groups of people left an abiding mark on the early Romans? Jesse, tell me one of them. Okay. Yes. So this place that's labeled Etruria, that's where the Etruscans are from. Who wants to give me the other one? Greece. Greece, that we talked about a lot, right? So I'm not going to go into them, but let's talk about these Etruscans for a minute. Because I told you that did we talk about them before? This sounds familiar. As we talked about the fact that they got, the early Romans got their the gods from the Greeks, and much of their building style, architectural style from the Greeks. The Etruscans were another big mover and shaker, and they were there apparently when the earliest people came to Rome. And I have some pictures of Etruscan things too. This is a statue, they call it the Apollo of Veii, which is an Etruscan town, but the Etruscans have a god named Apullu. Is Apollo the same as Apullu? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. This was on the roof of a temple. Here, I will actually pass things around. I'm feeling like passing things around today. I'm watching my time. A lot of these things were cast in bronze, and it makes it much lighter, so you don't have to support it. As a matter of fact, my high schoolers have learned that we've looked at a lot of statues, Roman statues, and some Greek statues last year, and often you'll see a statue, and it's made of stone, but the person is leaning. So they've got a little tree stump, sometimes a little Cupid down there or something, and their leg is leaning against it. This is always a sign that it's a copy. The original was cast in bronze, and it was freestanding, but when you put it in stone, they need something to prop it up, so they put a little tree stump or something like that. Okay, this one you will love. This is the Chimera. This is a bronze Etruscan statue from the 4th century. So a chimera is basically, depending on the story, just a bunch of animals plopped together, whatever animals you want to plop today. This particular one has a lion head, a serpent tail, and unfortunately, for the picture I got, the thing coming out its side is a goat head. Because why not have a goat head coming out your side? I think so. Or it's my nondescript four-legged animal. Every four-legged animal I draw is basically the same. Just has different lengths of legs or tails.
We used to have a book about the ancient Greeks, where it was kind of like a story where we read about like every ever that like happened. We could read about like Hercules.
Mhm.
It was illustrated as well.
Awesome.
It was really nice. So,
Did it have a chimera in it?
yeah, that's where I read it.
This is also Etruscan. And I guess I'm wanting you to notice a little bit. We looked at some Greek statues last semester. You see, these people don't look anything like the Greek statues. That Apollo, the different faces, it's a completely different style. This, art historians love this thing though. This is a sarcophagus, but their bodies aren't in it, just ashes, because the Romans, like the Greeks, were a people that burned bodies on a pyre. But it's a man and his wife, and they're at a dinner party because, as we will talk about actually in a little while, and I think you know, the Romans had a habit of lying down on sofas at dinner, which I just so think we should just cut all the legs of our tables off halfway. Just putting, we could, if we all in this room agreed to do this, we could start a trend. Probably not. Although I feel like my arm would get really tired of supporting me. You know how when you lay for a long time on one arm, maybe you're young enough, this doesn't happen to you, but for me, I become really achy. Anyway, no, the point of this being a dinner party is the fact that Greek and Roman women, the wives, would never be at the dinner party. Etruscan women were notorious for being out there in public, doing everything their husbands did, doing everything the men did. Shockingly so for some of the Romans. We're going to meet an Etruscan king of Rome who had a daughter who was a case in point of being kind of a wild Etruscan lady. But anyway, this is an Etruscan sarcophagus, if you want to look at it. And now the thing that is not an elephant. Oh, actually, can I save that? I want to save that.
Is it not split in half?
I think so, because it's a container. Oh, do you mean half left and right, or half? It does look split in half left and right, doesn't it? Maybe that's how they move it apart and they put the ashes inside. I know no details about this, Rhett. We can speculate as much as we like because I don't know.
Imagine like the movie, like, oh, two heads,
Yeah. I hope not. I hope not. Actually, if your book is like mine, that picture is in your book, if you have the Memoria Press edition. So where does legend tell us that the Romans came from? Who are the Romans, according to the story? This is the gamble I always take, passing things around. But you guys aren't looking at pictures. Where are the Romans from?
Greece.
But you're close.
They came from.
Say it again. Troy. Troy. The city of Troy that was attacked for 10 years by the Greeks. And you may remember, it's been these many months ago, like 3-4 months ago, we read a retelling about the Trojan War, right? And when we did that, we talked about the fact that much of that story is based on 2 poems, Greek poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Okay, and
we have to read that.
no, because
Yeah, I know.
high school will be the Middle Ages next year. Because I can't do them all in order. So Homer, the Greek poet, told us in his poem, the Iliad, it's called, remember, Iliad for Ilium, which was the Greek name for Troy. So Iliad means the poem about Troy. Okay, and Homer said this, made this comment. There was a guy named Aeneas. I don't have a wiper. That's okay. So I feel like the purple is kind of ugly, but okay. Aeneas. You do not have to write this guy's name down. Okay. And he was Trojan. He was actually like a nephew of the King Priam. It's very similar. I don't think they're related. I don't know that they're related, but that's very good remembering. What were you going to say, Matthew? Did you want to say something? Okay. So Homer in this poem, at one point, has this character Aeneas, this Trojan hero, and he's going to die because Achilles is going to kill him because that's what Achilles does. And the gods are talking like, "Oh, Aeneas, should we let him die?" And another god says, "No, we should not let him die because he is destined to live and take the Trojan survivors with him and start a new city and take care of them and rule over them." This is all Homer says. But the Romans read this like, hot dog, that's our guy, Aeneas. He ran away from Troy. He got the survivors together. They sailed away. They went to Italy, and his descendants founded Rome. That was their story. That's their legend. All right. And it's yes.
Greek gods were true and all that stuff. Like, it sounds, if you're looking at this, we don't know who started us, and then you read the story of
Yeah. So that's what they believed about themselves. We are Trojans, which isn't it interesting? So they're the losers. Do you see the Trojans lost the Trojan War? But is it, okay, I don't know, this is kind of a philosophical question. Is it more honorable to win, just keep winning? Or is it more honorable to lose, but then come back from it and become great? It does make a cool story, doesn't it? And so the stories that we tell about ourselves, even sometimes when they're not true stories, kind of shape how you feel about yourself. Matthew, did you want to add something else? Because you had your, oh, yeah, okay. So I was thinking about this. America has stories we tell about ourselves. And does America have any superheroes, except when I say that makes your mind go in a certain direction? Okay, George Washington is a superhero. And we do tell stories about him, don't we? And I think I might have mentioned in this class before, the famous cherry tree story. And if you don't know it, the story is that his father gave him, I don't know if it was one or several cherry trees to take care of. And he was little and he had a hatchet and he just cut down trees because kids do stupid things, apparently, and he cut it down. And his dad found out and he said, "George, did you cut down the tree? What happened to the tree?" And the story that we tell is, he answers his dad, "I cannot tell a lie. I cut it down with my little hatchet." Okay, so we don't know, Jesse. I mean, that's a cynical way to look at it, but I don't think the people who have told that story for 200 years felt that way about it. They really, that's our guy. He cannot tell a lie. When he did something wrong, even as a child, he fessed up. Or we have Abraham Lincoln who, miscounted the change when he was working in the store, and he walked miles to give somebody back the proper change because he's honest Abe. Yeah, it wasn't much, but a couple of cents mattered much more in the 1830s and 1840s than it does today too. So we have stories that we tell, and I don't ever want you to mistake when I say it doesn't matter if it's true. It matters to me very much if things are true. But in this case, the story about George Washington and his cherry tree tells me something about how Americans feel about George Washington and how we feel about what our ideal leader should be like, and why maybe we're so disgusted with the people that we see in Washington today that we perceive as being lying and cheating, and because we had a guy who once said, "I cannot tell a lie." That's how we feel about ourselves. So am I clear to you guys? Are you old enough that I'm clear when I say it doesn't matter to me whether it's true or not? Like all the stuff I'm telling you, it matters very much to me whether it's true. But in this case, the story tells me something. But do we have non-real American heroes? They're probably not real, or maybe based on somebody real. I don't know how to ask. Okay, that's exactly where I'm going. That's exactly where I'm going. Now, Johnny Appleseed apparently is true. His name's John Chapman.
I mean, I don't know what if he's real or not, but
Yeah, no, but the stories that people tell about him have gotten out of control. So for those of you who are not familiar with Johnny Appleseed, apparently lived in Pennsylvania, and as people were moving west, when there was nobody, European settlers in Illinois yet, and people were just starting to move west, he went to cider presses and he asked for the seeds, the apples, when they pressed and he just took bags of seeds and he started planting trees. And he would plant little plantations and then he'd uproot the young trees. And the settlers, as they go by, he'd just give them trees so that when they set up their homestead, they could have apple trees, or that, there would just be apple trees growing and they could eat on the way. And so, what does that story tell me? It tells me that we valued the people who were a part of that movement west, that movement west was important. Also involved in moving west was cutting down forests and clearing land for farms. And we also have a lumberjack guy, Paul Bunyan, right? Do you know Paul Bunyan? Yes or no? Tell me. Yeah, Paul Bunyan, yes or no? He's enormous. Apparently he's a giant. The kind that, he accidentally drops his shovel and he digs out the Great Lakes or something like that. We're talking about huge. Has a huge blue ox. I have no idea why. Named Babe. And he's obviously not normal. He's a giant. They tell Hercules type stories. He's a baby and he lives on the East Coast in the cradle. There's nowhere to put his cradle, so they have to put him in a boat and rock him out on the ocean because he's so big. But what are we telling when we tell a story about Paul Bunyan? That once upon a time, all those forests were cleared in little farms and we spread across the country. And so anyway, this is a long digression, but my point is that people tell stories about themselves, about their past, and they tell you something about, well, what do you think of yourselves? What's important to you? What kind of stories do you tell about yourselves? And we tell stories about truth-telling leaders and brave, huge, pioneering men who moved west. Yes, go ahead, Matthew. Yeah. You know what? I think I know what you mean. Sometimes when we make up stories, like fairy tales are like this. We talked about this with the Greek stories too, didn't we? Sometimes they tell you a truth, even though the story isn't true. But I don't want you to go home and think Mrs. Ferguson thinks that all these stories aren't true. No, I'm very clear about, like, Cinderella is not a true story as far as I know. But it tells me something true because we're all under the thumb of the wicked stepsisters and the stepmother, aka Satan. And we will go to the ball someday. And the fairy godmother did come to give us the proper clothes. Jesus came. Do you see what I mean? So there's something true in there, but I don't think the story is true. But so it's a lying true. But the word lie doesn't set very well with me. But okay. Yeah.
I have a story. It was kind of interesting because there was this statue of this guy in this town, little town, and there was this guy there, and the statue was Paul Bunyan, and they like totally believed it. This town believed that this was their founder.
Sure.
And all the soldiers were kind of like kind of coming back, like he was a big guy, but like
Not like 20 feet tall.
not
Yeah.
insane. And so like that kind of makes me think like, okay, maybe because like we all know that we've taken stories like and like maybe like the Abraham. I'm not saying that Abraham didn't do this, but maybe it was like the guy walked out and then he walked to his house and it wasn't like several.
He walked 20 miles or something like that. Sure, things get bigger in the retelling.
And so that made me think like, okay, maybe there was some sort of, or maybe his name wasn't Paul Bunyan, maybe he wasn't insane, but like maybe there was this guy that cut down trees. But
yeah, it could be. Yeah. Sure.
So I'm not saying like St. Nicholas like the guy I wanted to go, but like right now Saint is another one.
Yeah. So St. Nicholas is one, or
St. Nicholas, like I'm not talking about St. Nicholas long term.
oh yes, because he was real. Yes. Yes. And because and what are we telling when we tell stories about Santa Claus? About giving, right? And Santa is very a little creepy, but also a little like God. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. What? He's omniscient? Apparently Santa is omnipresent and omniscient. He's a little like God. Oh. There's another story. Joe Magarac. My parents used to listen to a folk tales album. Anyway, he was made of steel. He was a steel maker, but apparently I was a small child, and I'm not totally sure about the story still. But eventually they ran out of the iron that they needed, and he jumped in the kettle and he melted himself down to make more steel, so they could build the railroads. It's a railroad legend because of the steel building the railroads. Anyway, the Romans. Let's go back to the Romans. But it's kind of fun to dive down the rabbit hole a little bit and think, what are the stories that we tell about ourselves? Okay. Tooth Fairy is just plain straight up creepy. I don't even know. I will take bones that fell out of your head and I will give you money. What are you doing with them? Why would you want them? I don't know. Well, no, you don't even want to come to my house then, Owen. My kids, we were cheap. You got one of each coin. A quarter, a dime, a nickel, a penny, because I thought it's one of each. It's 41 cents. So that's what my kids got, except for the many, many nights when the Tooth Fairy was just really tired. I just totally forgot there was a tooth. And then the child's like, oh, I don't know. Try again. Sometimes they had to try it 2 or 3 times. Okay, before the 41 cents showed up. Okay, let's move on to the Romans. The Romans' story is that we are Trojans, but we overcame. We made it through the carnage, that terrible night when the men came out of that wooden horse and obliterated Troy. And we gathered on the seashore, and it wasn't just men. Their families came. Children were there. And they got on a boat, and they went on a journey because the gods appeared to Aeneas and told him, we have a plan for you. We want you to go somewhere else and build a new city, and it is going to become a great city. Okay, so the story goes, let's make sure I don't ruin the questions by telling you the answer, which I did yesterday. That Aeneas and his followers land in Italy. And as we discussed, when people are already living somewhere and you show up, they say, please go away. And he did not, because he said, I'm sorry, the gods told me to come here. And war gets stirred up in a way that we will talk about later. And great battles, but they settle there on the coast of Italy. But they don't build Rome. Aeneas has a son named Ascanius, but he's also often called Iulus. I don't know. Don't ask me, I don't know. You can't ask, but I still don't know. And Aeneas died, but Ascanius took over. And Ascanius founded a new town called Alba Longa, which means long and white. I don't know. Okay. And several hundred years pass, and Ascanius has descendants who are two brothers. Their names are Numitor and Amulius. Don't know. Numitor, I always get this botched, but I'm pretty sure Amulius is the rightful king, and Numitor takes over. I may have that backwards. Okay, I'm sorry. We're just going to go with that, okay? And Amulius is booted out, and Amulius has a daughter. Her name is Rhea Silvia. Lovely lady. And he says, Rhea Silvia, you are not having any children because your children would be the descendants of the rightful king, and we can't have that because I have just stolen the throne from my brother. We don't want any more descendants. So you go over there, you're going to be a priestess, you live in that house, lock the doors, shut the windows, don't go out. It's not much of a life. But imagine his shock and surprise when Rhea Silvia turns up pregnant. It's like, I told you not to go out. Told you to. Well, her story is, but I didn't. I was visited by the god Ares. Only they call him Mars. I was visited by Mars, and these are Mars's children. It's like, great. So you know what we do with children when we don't want them. What do we do with children when we don't want them in Greece and Rome? Throw them out. Okay, so we throw them out. She has twins, 2 little boys. Throw them out. So they throw them out on the banks of the Tiber. The Tiber River had been flooding recently. And like, it's kind of muddy. You know, if it's my job to throw the baby out, I don't want to get all dirty. It's like, just toss them over there a little bit. The water will rise and they'll get carried away. Well, the water didn't rise. They just stayed there on the mud. And then lo and behold, a wolf shows up. A wolf. No, that would be terrible. She fed the children. The babies eat from the wolf. This is another Etruscan statue, by the way. And I just have to throw this in, although it has nothing to do. I'm just very rambling today. The wolf is an Etruscan statue. The babies are actually Renaissance editions. All my life, I saw this picture in books. I'm like, oh, look at no, some guy in the Renaissance said, wouldn't it be fun to just stick the 2 babies under there? No, you can't do that and then confuse me for the rest of my life. So originally it was just the wolf. This is the wolf that fed them. So they get taken care of by a wolf, but eventually, as always happens, a shepherd comes by, right? Faustulus, and says, oh, a baby, 2 babies in this case, and takes them home, and his wife raises them. Well, he raises them too. And so Romulus and Remus are these kids' names. And because their dad is Mars, and because their grandpa is the rightful king, they're awesome. I don't know what else to say. You know, whenever they go play with the other little boys, they're the most awesome. They win all the games. And when they set up little courts where somebody's going to play the king, it's always Romulus and Remus. They always get the good parts, you know. And this comes to the attention of their grand uncle, Numitor, usurper of the throne, who perhaps thinks these boys look just a tad like his family, maybe, and start looking into it. And it also comes to the attention of their dad, their grandpa, who thought his grandsons had been thrown out all those years ago. Long story short, they rise up, they throw out their usurping uncle and give the throne back to Grandpa. And I don't have any idea what they have to say or do for their mother. And they decide that they're going to go build a new city. I don't want to take over Grandpa's city. I just put Grandpa back on the throne. I'm going to go build another city. So Romulus and Remus go out in a likely looking spot. Hey, you know what would be a fun spot? Right there where they tried to throw us out. Love that. So on the banks of the Tiber, they decide to build a city. They can't quite decide exactly what they want to look like. So Remus is working over here, and Romulus is working over here, okay? And they say, well, gee, what should we name our new city? Well, let's have a contest, so to speak. So the Etruscans who lived around them were famous for something called augury. We saw this a little bit in Greece, looking at bird flights and seeing that it means something, the omens and the portents. They were also known for having haruspikes is the plural. Looking at the internal organs of animals. Like we just cut it open and then we look at the liver and we say, oh, I don't know, that liver doesn't look very good. Don't do it. Whatever it is you're planning, don't do it today. It's a bad omen. Or sometimes you read, it's like, and they opened up the sacrifice and it had no heart. No, it would be dead. It had to have a heart. Anyway, this was something they got from the Etruscans. So Romulus and Remus decided to do this. Let's look at the birds. You stand over here and you stand over here. And then whoever sees the signs, that'll be the person who's really in charge. So Remus sees 6 eagles flying on the right. Eagles, right, very good omen. And he sees them first. Romulus sees 12, but he sees them second. So, and not that this would ever happen in your house, but I'm sure you can picture the sibling scene. Well, I saw them first. Well, I saw more. And they start arguing. Yeah, they start arguing. Okay, so there's already a problem. But they're working on the city, and Romulus is building, and his wall isn't very high, because you have to start from the ground up, and it takes a while to build. And he's, calling down curses on anyone who ever invades his city, blah, blah, blah. And Remus comes up and says, that's not much of a wall. Any animal could jump over that wall. And he jumps over the wall. And Romulus kills him. I am kidding you not. Do never, ever, ever do this at home. If we learn nothing today, it's like that just doesn't end well. So yeah, so this is why Rome is Rome for Romulus, because he killed his brother. It's not Reem. Isn't that funny? It could be Rome, could be Reem. And he said, cursed be everybody, just like Remus, who invades my city. I don't know. Now, I just got done telling you that we know things about people from the stories they tell about themselves. So what kind of people would you expect the Romans to become with a start like that? What do you say? Okay. Owen? Jealous and disobedient. You got something, Jesse? Sure. I do not know. Rival cities or something like that. And who would get the blessing, the God blessing of Aeneas' descendants will go and they will form a great city and it will rule the world.
It's like choosing whether or not to go to Harvard or Yale. It's like,
I suppose so. I can see that.
he's like, you just watch both. These are like the best. And then, but you have to decide which one's better. Pretty cool.
Well, fortunately, Romulus saved us the problem because he just killed the competition. This is how the Romans believed they came to be. Now, do you notice this alternate name for his son? Hey guys, Iulus. And do you remember the I's? There was no J, you know, so it's like Julius. The Julian family, including Mr. Julius Caesar, of whom you have probably heard, believed they were descended from Iulus. This is the Julian family. And Aeneas's mom happens to be Aphrodite. Did I mention that? Yeah, also known as Venus to the Romans. And so they traced their lineage back to Venus through Iulus. This is the story they told of themselves. Now, you do not have to write this down, okay? I'm going to give you a little bit of a kind of a foretaste of what the semester is going to look like. Rome's history falls into 3 different time periods. In the first time period, they had kings to rule over them. Any guess who the first king is? No. Romulus. Romulus is the first king of Rome. All right. They had 7 kings. And then the last king was a rotter, and his son was even rottener. And they got rid of the kings. And they set up a republic, much like our republic, in which they had governmental officers elected to represent the people who had terms of office, and then they went out of office and they had new ones. But the republic developed problems that we will talk about later this semester. And then finally, the only thing that would cure it is if one person took charge, and that's the time of the empire. So this goes from, timelines. We got to get something on our timelines. This is important. Turn to the timeline that is on page 71. Yes, you do. And very close to 776, which is the first Olympics, I would like you to put 753 BC, founding of Rome. Honestly, we don't know that it was exactly in the year 753. And archaeologists dig in Rome and they found settlements that are slightly older than this. But this is the year that has been used for generations. And this is also important because just like the Greeks counted time from that first Olympics in 776, the Romans counted time from 753. And just like we put AD or BC, they put AUC after their year. Ab urbe condita, from the founding of the city. So many years, ab urbe condita, from the founding of the city. It is kind of cool. So 753 BC, founding of Rome. So it went from 753 to like 509, and then the Republic went from 509 to 27, and then 27 to 476 AD is generally the fall of the Roman Empire date. You have to write that down. Like we're gonna add these things on. I just wanted to see how it's divided. Now, first of all, for your homework, I'm going to ask you to read about the 7 kings of Rome in the Dorothy Mills book. And I'm just going to flat out tell you it's a lot of pages. It's like over 40 pages in the Dorothy Mills book. You know, there's pictures. But I just want to warn you, this is the only week I'm asking you to do this, and it's simply because I didn't know how to break it up. There just was no better way. I toyed with it, and I just didn't know how else to break it up. And it's just easier to just talk about the era of the kings all in one week. So just pace yourself, all right? Remember that instead of 13 or 18 pages, you're reading 40 or 45 pages in the Dorothy Mills book, okay? The other book you're reading of, it's not going to take you very long to read, okay? It's perfectly doable, but I just wanted to warn you. And don't worry, oh my gosh, Mrs. Ferguson's going to kill us second semester. No, just this 1 week, and then we'll go back to normal, okay? You did the whole book of Rome? That's awesome. Well, don't tell anybody how it ends. Don't tell anybody how anything ends. Okay. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is the other book, the second book that we're going to start reading. Okay. And I want to give you a little introduction to it. Okay. Just like Homer wrote a book, 2 poems actually, the Iliad about the Trojan War, the Odyssey about crazy Odysseus and all his trip home. The Romans wrote a poem like this too. But it was a little different because a poet got hired to write the poem. Homer just wrote because he's a poet, he's a bard. But during the time when the Republic was turning into an empire, during this time, there was a man who took over, and we know him as Augustus, the very first emperor. In fact, it was Augustus who was in charge when the book of Luke tells us he sent out a decree that the whole Roman world be taxed. And so Mary and Joseph had to go to Bethlehem to be counted. In the days of Caesar Augustus, this is the same guy. He really wanted to give Rome a pep talk about being Roman. He felt like, we've had some bad times. We'll talk about the bad times, but there were some bad times before he came. Lots of wars, lots of death. People aren't proud to be Roman anymore. We need a poem, by golly. We need an Iliad or an Odyssey. A story that tells us who we are. I'm going to hire a poet and he's going to write me a poem. Well, he had a poet in mind. There was a already well-known poet, and we call him Virgil. His name is Publius Virgilius Maro. We just call him Virgil because that's a long name. We just like the short. And Virgil had already written some poems, and he was well known. And Augustus said, hey, Virgil, I need you to write a poem about the founding of Rome, about early Rome, that tells us who we are as a people so we can get our groove back, so we can be patriotic again, And Virgil worked on this for like 20 years, 15 or 20 years. It only is half as long as the Iliad. But it's very much like the Iliad and the Odyssey. Part of it involves traveling, where you run into all kinds of weird monsters and stuff, just like Odysseus. And then part of it involves landing in Italy and having to fight battles, which sounds very much like the Iliad and the Trojan War. So he borrowed from Homer, he copied things, but he stuck in his own ideas too. And this book, this poem, is called the Aeneid because it is the story of Aeneas and how he escaped Troy on that horrible night when it was burning to the ground, and he and his companions sailed all over looking for a new home and had all sorts of adventures and then had to fight for a place in Italy when they got there. This is the story. Virgil died, and he didn't feel like his poem was quite done. And he told the people that were with him as he was dying, burn it. Burn it. When I'm dead, burn it. Augustus arrived just in time. They did not burn it. But it leaves us with some questions. It tells a finished story, but we want to know, well, Mr. Virgil, what were you going to do? What did you not like about it that you wanted it burned? Was he just a perfectionist? And, but I didn't do the final proofread, so I don't want anyone to see it. Or did he say things that maybe he wanted to change? We'll talk about that as we read it. I'm not having you guys read the actual poem, but I am having you read the Aeneid for boys and girls, which sounds a little like you're in 3rd grade or something like that. It's not for boys and girls, but it's just a retelling, not a poem, of the story that the Aeneid tells us. The story that Augustus hired a poet Write this down and make us a story. Virgil, make us a story too, so we can be proud again. Now, I would like you to read chapters 1 through 5, but I need to tell you something. The chapters don't actually have numbers. Do you see? It just has a chapter name. So you have to rely on your acute mathematical skills of counting to 5 and counting the first 5 chapters. Also, so, just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you've read through this, you're done. You're going to end on page 30, up through page 30, okay? So if you want to write that down, you can. First 5 chapters, also known as up to page 30. And this is the story of what the Romans thought of themselves. Now, I got to tell you something else about Virgil, because he's really cool. Virgil, he wasn't the only great poet living at the time. And if he hadn't written the Aeneid, and it hadn't been so spectacular, he might have just kind of faded into obscurity. Or maybe he'd just be one of several poets. But when the church began, many of the early Christian apologists, people who, apology not meaning I'm sorry, but making a defense, right? Apologetics. They knew classical literature. They knew the Iliad and the Odyssey. They had very good education, many of them. And they knew this. And they noticed a couple of things about Virgil. First of all, it struck them that the story of a man who lived in a place where the gods came to him and said, "You're not staying there. We want you to travel to the place where we are sending you, and we will make of you a great nation," sounded very much like Abraham. It was one of those stories that has echoes of a true story. And so they were curious about Virgil. Who is this Virgil? What did he believe? But the thing that really got him is the fact that Virgil had written a series of poems, the Eclogues and the Georgics. They're basically poems that say, "Oh, aren't we happy we live in the country? We're shepherds, and we have bees, and we grow flowers, and our garden's beautiful." I don't know how else to sum up these poems. It's pretty pastoral, we call this, celebrating the country. Georgics means just working the land. That's literally what Georgia means in Greek, work the land. And eclogues means just short poems. But he wrote one of these eclogues, Eclogue 4, and it kind of freaked people out, because this is what he said. This is kind of an old-fashioned translation, but I'm not going to read the whole thing. And I think you'll hear where I'm going with it, okay? All right. Now the last age has come and gone, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. Justice returns with a new breed of men sent down from heaven. Only do thou at the boy's birth, in whom the iron shall cease, the golden race arise. Under thy guidance, whatso tracks remain of our old wickedness, once done away, shall free the earth from never-ceasing fear. He shall receive the life of gods, and see heroes with gods commingling, and himself be seen of them. And he will reign o'er a world at peace. For thee, O boy, first shall the earth untilled pour forth her gifts. And he goes on, okay? That's the most striking parts. I think there's going to be a boy. There's going to be a boy born, I don't know. And he's going to reign over peace, and everything's going to be wonderful, and he's going to do away with wickedness, and he's going to know the gods, and he's going to have the life of the gods. He's like, what? The early Christians said, "Are you kidding me?" The kicker is nobody knows who Virgil is talking about. They only guess. Classicists, people who study ancient literature, They say, well, maybe it was this guy, some famous Roman had a son, and maybe Virgil had high hopes for this kid, and that's probably true. It does sound like Jesus. And that's what the early Christians said. Oh my gosh, I think maybe Virgil got used by God. Because God can use whoever he wants, right? He used Pharaoh. He can use anybody he wants. He can send messages through anybody he wants. You don't even have to know that the message is coming from God through you. So the early Christians read this and they thought, I think Virgil was almost a Christian. I think if Virgil, he died about 19 years before Jesus was born. And so there came to be, I'm just telling you what they said. Not necessarily what I believe. I'm just telling you what the early Christians said. The early church said, I think he would have become a Christian if he had had a chance. Virgil is like almost a Christian. And the church just took Virgil in and just like adopted him almost as one of their own, because they said, I think God used him to communicate truth and he didn't even understand what he was writing. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that 1,300 years later, in the Middle Ages, a great Italian poet wrote a very long poem called the Divine Comedy. And in this poem, he travels through hell and purgatory and paradise. And the poet who wrote this chose as his guide Virgil. Virgil is his guide in the poem. He takes him through hell and he takes him up the mountain of purgatory. But in the poem, Virgil can't go to paradise because he didn't know Jesus. Anyway, so this amazing poet is our connection, and my head is exploding just thinking about this. Virgil died 2,050 years ago. But that legacy from the things he wrote passed through into the church, and then 1,000 years later through in Italian poetry, a poem that I'm going to read with my high schoolers next year, and the baton just keeps getting passed forward. It's amazing. But we are not going to read his eclogues and Georgics because they're kind of boring, except for that one. We are going to read his Aeneid, okay? So read chapters 4 and 5 in Dorothy Mills. It's in your reading guide anyway. A lot of pages, but bear with me. Read chapters 1 through 5 in the book, the Aeneid. And then I have to share with you my poems, and then I'm going to talk about what your writing is. Yes, no, I've not forgotten. However, I'm going to have you do something you've already done once. So I think just a little prompt will help you. But we have 2 awesome poems that I have to read. Because I really get mad when you leave and I realize I forgot the poems. Yes?
You do the 3 salary things again, so I can go last 3.
Even if I don't assign it, there is no one stopping you from doing it. You can do it, but we are doing something else. You may do both. I will never reprimand anyone for doing more than I ask them to do. That is always okay. Okay, one thing I didn't mention about Rome. Rome is not only strategically placed on the Tiber River, which flows out into the Mediterranean, but it also has 7 hills. And hills are always a good place of defense. It's hard to attack people running uphill. But it's easy to throw things at people who are running up a hill at you, right? It's just easier. It's easy to be on top of a hill. And Rome, famously, is the city of 7 hills. I have spoken to 2 of my students who have been to Rome, and I asked, what's the scoop on these hills? Are they big hills? When you're in Rome, do you see the hills? I'm like, no, not really. Where did the hills go? I don't know. If they're not very big, how are they helpful for defense? But you know how over thousands of years, if you live in a place, people dump their garbage, right? And the level of the ground rises. You're probably familiar with this. And archaeologists kind of cut through the layers and they can see the strata of the things that were there. So we were speculating maybe people have been living in Rome for 3,000 years and the level just rises. But how small could these hills have been if they... This is a burning question of my life. This is a life quest for me. I need to go to Rome and then just like start scouring Rome. Where's the hill? Okay, here's a poem on the 7 hills of Rome. Rome was built on 7 hills. Each hill had a name. See if you can learn them. Pretend that it's a game. If you all vote to, maybe we should memorize. Maybe even if you don't vote to. Okay. The Viminal, the Aventine, the Quirinal, the Esquiline. To these please add the Palatine, the Caelian, the Capitoline. Rome was built on 7 hills, and there begins the story of the famous Roman Empire and its eternal glory. The Capitoline Hill, guess what was on the Capitoline Hill? The Capitol building. Yes. Guess why they called it the Capitol building? Haha, it's hilarious. Yeah, but guess what they found? They were digging and they found a head. I know, and this is my other question. Is it a real head or just a stone head from a statue? I don't know. The stories never say. It's just like, and they dug up a head. Randomly. And as you know, caput is the Latin word for head. And so they found a head on this, so they called it the Capitoline. And so they put the government buildings on the Capitoline. So the government buildings became the Capitol. And now today, Springfield or Washington, D.C. is our capital. And it's all based on somebody digging up a head somewhere 1,000 years ago, which I think is hilarious. Okay. History is so funny. Okay, Romulus and Remus, and then we'll talk about our writing. Remus and Romulus, where have you been? Out in the forest, a wolf took us in. She fed us and nursed us just like her own, then gave us to shepherds until we were grown. Remus and Romulus, what will you be? The founders of Rome, 753 BC. They look very cute in this picture. Yes, much better than this Etruscan one. Okay, so writing. Most of this semester, now calm down, Jesse. It's all good. We are going to do work on writing essays, all right? But because you just came back from Christmas and you're just full of Christmas cookies and my brain still hurts and I'm still coughing and I don't want to deal with it, we are just going to do one more of our reports, our nonfiction reports, okay? I know. And so like some of you are like, yeah, I like those. I hate those. But hopefully the subject matter will make it a little more fun. It's on Roman food and dining. Thank you. Okay. Roman food and dining. So I want to remind you of this process, okay? After I find the Kleenex with which I have been wiping the board. There it is. So let's start out with this. And you may write these down if you want to. It might help, but I don't know that you need it. If I told you that I wanted you to write 3 paragraphs on Roman food and dining, how many topics about Roman food and dining do you need? 3. Okay, good. Yeah, you passed the first test with flying colors. Yes, 3 paragraphs means 3 topics. What are some things that you might be able to talk about that have to do with Roman food and dining? Just tell me some things. Tell me something that has to do with Roman food and dining. Okay, like what foods? What kinds of food? Okay, that's one thing we could talk about. What else could we talk about? What's another one, Matthew? Okay, that might not make a whole paragraph for us. How about if we just put drinks underneath? Because maybe they're just heavy drinkers, and then we could get a whole paragraph out of that. We're not sure yet. Yes. Okay, table etiquette. How do you behave at the table? What, do you have one, Rhett?
Menus.
Okay, so where do you eat? So where? In other words, in homes? Did they have restaurants? Mm-hmm. Yes. Or did they have like, Yeah. No, and they actually did have sort of like Sonic or something, except you didn't drive in. I mean, you just came up to like Checkers, if you don't want to drive through, you can go to the little window, Anyway, they have Sonic, you can do it at Checkers too, except you usually just drive through. Unless the line is really, really long. But you can't go inside the Checkers. Anyway, okay, that's not important. What else could we talk about? Can you think of something else? Another category? Okay, preparation, food prep. That's good. How about, this goes a little with table etiquette, how about dishes? Did they use knives and forks? Did they eat with their hands? Okay, this goes along a little bit with etiquette too, but dinner parties. Did they have dinner parties? Was there, with restaurants and restaurant? Was there entertainment? Did they like to have entertainment during their food, during their meal? Okay, so we only need 3. And here's some ideas. So first thing I'm going to do, you can write this down if you want to, because it reminds you of steps. Step 1, read your sources. Right? I'm now going to give them to you because you're like, I don't have a source. I know. Take one and pass. Yes, you can give one to Matthias. And then there's a second one coming around. Don't take 2 of the same one. All right, we'll wait for those to go around. I'll get these out of my way. We're handing out our sources, Matthias. Okay, yeah, take. All right, then Ella, I'll just grab the leftovers from you. I think there will be at least one leftover. Call them leftovers. It's kind of, well, it is food and dining. Okay. Okay, there's a problem here. These are exactly the same. Oh, there's 2. Are there 2 more that are okay? I thought that somebody has 2 that are exactly the same. Okay. Yes. And I don't think I counted real carefully. Okay, so step 1, read your sources. Why? Because I don't really know what to pick until I know what my sources talk about, right? So either using this list or making your own list or just jotting things down as you read. Oh, they're talking about all the kinds of food they like to eat. Write that down. Oh, they're talking all about the dishes. Write that down. Oh, yay, there are so many drinks. I can make a separate drink paragraph. Yay. Start with your sources and find out what they talk about. Yes, Rhett. Oh, yes, neighbors of the Greeks, yes. Very good. And then I need you to choose 3 topics, presumably topics that your sources said something about. Is it okay if only one source talks about it, but the other one doesn't very much? Yes, it is. Because of the next thing we're going to do. We're going to outline from source 1. I don't care which one is source 1. Source 1 is the first one you pick up and it's in your hand, okay? And I'm going to have to make an outline. Do you guys remember all this? And then, I don't know, somewhere between 4 and 7 topics, okay? And I have chosen my topics. I don't know, I'm guessing. I'm going to pick kinds of food, dinner parties, and dishes. No, entertainment. Entertainment would be much more fun, okay? And then I'm going to read my source. And how am I going to decide what to write down? What do I use to choose? if it's interesting or important. Remember? Everybody remember? So maybe I've got source one, I've got, oh, tons of kinds of food. I only had 2 things about dinner parties and 3 things about entertainment. It's okay, because my next step outline source 2, right? I'm going to do the same thing. Do you guys forgive me if I don't draw another outline? Okay, but here's a second outline that's exactly like this. And I pick up my other source. It's got the same 3 topics, same topics. Oh, and this one only has 2 kinds of food, but oh my gosh, it's all about dinner parties. And these people just can't stop with the entertainment, apparently. All right, I wrote down so much stuff. And then your last step is a fused outline. I'm going to make my outline one more time. And I'm going to take things from both my outlines, the best of the best. Yes, so here's what I want you to do this week. 3 outlines. Don't write the paper. Outlines. That's all you're doing. Well, you might have to edit it because I have stuff I want you to put in the paper. You know what I mean? Like figures of speech. But, and everybody look at me. I would really like you to bring me your outlines. I don't need to collect them. If they're in a notebook, you don't have to rip them out, okay? But I would just like to come around the table and make sure we got it, okay? And then after we do this, then the next week we'll write it. Then after that, we're gonna start working on writing a 5 or 6 paragraph essay, answering a question, arguing a side, persuasive essays. And we'll spend most of the semester doing that. It'll be something a little different, and you can use a little more creativity and imagination with it too, okay? Are we good? Dorothy Mills, lots of pages, 5 unnumbered chapters of the book, The You Need for Boys and Girls, and 3 outlines. If you start outlining and you say, oh, she didn't remind me enough, it's been so long, I don't really remember what to do now, email me or call me, all right? And I will walk you through it, okay? Awesome. See you next week. I made it through without a coughing